Welcome to Wilder. Today, I'm honored to be joined here by Sadie Hine, who is a photographer I've been following for a while now and who has been making some fantastic art with her recent work on tide pools and the fascinating creatures who live in them. Sadie, it's an honor to get to have you on here today. I call your work art largely, I feel like, because each and every time I see an image of yours nowadays, it feels very truly kind of intentionally crafted and created, and it always seems to blow me away. I mean, literally before this conversation, you posted up a sandworm that I was just fascinating with how you kind of got that image. What makes a powerful and unique image in your perspective?
There's a few things. I think definitely something eye-catching and unique that people maybe haven't seen before. That's what I've been going for with a lot of my macro work and stuff like that. Like my recent post, for example, most people have never seen a larva that looks like that, let alone in a dune habitat like that. And it's just it has that kind of catching, like you have to look at it twice and be like, wait a minute, what exactly is this?
Yeah.
And I think that can also play into the storytelling aspect of an image. And it just gives people something to connect with and to kind of ponder a little bit. And I think that can make for a very effective image.
Yeah. Yeah, when I saw your image, it felt like it was like out of the movie Dune almost.
Yeah.
Was my initial take was like, whoa, that's a real creature? Like that's pretty phenomenal. So I love that you shared that.
Yeah.
Something else I find really amazing is you seem to be so knowledgeable about all the environments and the subjects that you photograph in. When, I'm reading through your captions, and at least to me, it seems to make a lot of sense about why you're able to kind of intentionally compose these images, because you seem to have such a deep understanding of not only the subject, but the environment around them as well, and the world that, is going on around them. How do you think your knowledge of nature comes into play with how you photograph wildlife?
So I think over the past couple of years, I've really began to be drawn more to a naturalistic side, a naturalism approach, and just focusing on learning about the ecosystems as a whole. I definitely started photography through a more photographic perspective and less like learning the different plants and the different species names and stuff like that. But since going to university, I've met really incredible people who are from all sorts of little niches and stuff like that, and who I've went out with and continuously learned so much from about the local habitats and stuff I spend time in. And I would also say that every single time I go out, I learn something new. I see something I've never seen before, and it's just continually adding to my understanding of it all. And through that, I feel like my eyes are also kind of trained to look for things that stand out.
Yeah, it sounds to me like you're attempting to take kind of almost a holistic approach for the most part to your photography. Like you're trying to do the photography, but also trying to learn, educate yourself, and do things even beyond that, which I'm sure we'll talk about later in the episode as well. But yeah. So even though you are very knowledgeable about the natural world, I noticed that you also do quite a bit of, I guess, very minimalistic or almost like studio-like looking shots of macro subjects as well. So, for example, you posted up something recently of a jumping spider, which you kind of framed it on a white t-shirt that, I don't know, you must have had on you at the moment or whatever. And it kind of gives that, very studio-looking type of shot. What's maybe the reason for going for some images as well that are more on that approach as opposed to the environmental approach that you do often?
Yeah, so I absolutely love environmental shots, and if there is a situation where an environment and a subject jumps out at me, I will 100% be focusing on that. But especially in the macro world, there's so many almost alien looking things that a lot of people have never seen before, and I think removing any sort of background by putting them on a white or black, just clean background, really draws attention to the subject, and the subject does most of the work in just showcasing how incredible some of these things are. And I've been having a lot of fun playing around with that, with different, bugs, jumping spiders, and then also nudibranchs, fish, crustaceans. Like it's been all over the place, and it's just been an incredible time.
Yeah, I was so fascinated with, like, I love that you shared that jumping spider photo recently, because I've been so fascinated with, I saw a YouTube video maybe, I don't know, 2 weeks ago that I shared also in my newsletter in the Zoom Out. And yeah, it was all about how jumping spiders, their vision, and how they have, they're able to see pretty much 180 around them, but then they have those two in front of their face that are able to just hyper focus and, fixate on things and see things that are just incredible. And so, yeah, they are fascinating creatures, and one of many.
Yeah.
I've also noticed that you've transitioned a lot from bigger subjects to smaller subjects over the years. And of course, you still shoot a mix. But, if you go further back on a lot of your social media, you'll see mostly just bigger animals and maybe occasionally a macro here or there. But now it's largely dominated by the small macro subjects, right? Why the switch for you? What inspired you to kind of focus more in on the small world?
So I grew up in Colorado, which is very well known for its winters and its snow and stuff like that. So for a lot of the year there, bigger subjects were kind of the only thing out. That would be birds and mammals and stuff like that. So that's kind of how I grew up viewing wildlife and photographing things and stuff like that. But then I moved to California for school, and suddenly in the lower elevations, you don't really get snow. And in a lot of places, the winters are the wettest and most active times of year, especially for the amphibians and stuff like that like the rain. And I just fell in love with things like that. Specifically, salamanders were kind of my gateway into the macro world, and I didn't have a macro lens for the longest time, and I had to kind of learn how to effectively take photos of these smaller subjects using my wide angle. I played around with taking macros with my telephoto.
Yeah.
Not really
not
that
easy.
Great as an idea, but and then through that, when I was eventually able to get a macro lens, I still find myself mostly using my wide angle and stuff like that for a lot of things, which is kind of funny. And yeah, no, I think growing up in a landlocked environment that's just so different from Northern California, I'm like, there's just that extra element of awe to everything. And especially the unique habitats and plants, and especially the intertidal zone and the ocean and stuff like that. It's just magical.
So one question I have for you as someone who does literally no underwater photography and virtually no macro photography is how do you kind of pick out, as you're walking around, tide pools and marshes and all those places that I've seen you, how do you kind of envision ahead of time what's going to make a good image of some small macro subject under the water? And how do you kind of plan out those shots in advance?
Yeah. So I do want to say that a very, very large majority of my underwater subjects, I actually photograph from above the surface. I don't have any sort of housing for my camera or anything like that. I'll kind of awkwardly position myself over the subject so my shadow gets rid of any reflections and stuff like that. And that works surprisingly well in a lot of scenarios. But I do have the Laowa probe lens, which the bottom half is waterproof, and that's when I get some of my underwater photos. Usually I kind of let the subject lead the way. If I see a really vibrant sea slug or something like that, of course I'm going to try and get in there and take some photos. And a lot of the times it can be very awkward at first, trying to get specific angles, holding my camera above the water, making sure nothing gets wet. And a lot of times I'll kind of circle around the entire subject, taking photos from every angle I can get until something clicks. I'd say it's largely a lot of just trial and error and playing around with different techniques and stuff like that. And I will say I'm always on the lookout for really eye-catching textures and colors and stuff that are found underwater.
That Lawa Probe lens is so cool to see you using that with wildlife, because back when I used to do product stuff, I used to do product commercials and stuff like that. That, you know, that's a hot lens in that market, but I would have never thought back in those days to try to use that for, you know, wildlife and nature. And so it's been very cool to see you using that and figuring out a way to like make that look really cool. So you've done excellent with that.
Thank you. Yeah, there's definitely a learning curve. It's definitely very challenging. It has a lot of frustrating moments, especially out in the field. But when it works, it's like
it's magical.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, that is so cool. I feel like you're really good at working with minimalist compositions and kind of leading lines, golden ratios, and just really technically sound compositions. Do you have kind of like almost maybe like a philosophy or strategy with what you try to accomplish with your compositions?
So I honestly don't think about things like the golden ratio and stuff too much while I'm out shooting. I usually loosely follow rule of thirds. You know, it's better to have a subject on one side or another rather than right in the center in most situations. I definitely look for different leading lines and stuff like that, which can be really fun in macro situations. I have a photo of a spider mite on the gills of a mushroom, and the gills of the mushroom just made so many unique, interesting lines, and I was able to kind of capture a moment where the mite lined up with that. So sometimes I do have physical, visible lines in my images. And I think it's just been fun to play around with all of that.
Maybe that's a testimony to like a lot of times too doing in the macro world. I feel like you're able to get like those more intricate and detailed patterns, and maybe that plays a lot into a lot of that. But yeah,
for sure.
That's awesome. I want to go through a couple of my favorite images of yours. You had this one fantastic one that I love that you captured of a California king snake. And I think what I like so much about this one is that, I mean, you're following, you know, those kind of rule of thirds that you were just mentioning a second ago, but something about the way that snake is kind of following that rule of thirds with the wraparound of his body, but yet he's kind of veering off path a little bit. And there's something about how he kind of like winds his way through the frame that just really stood out to me. And also that decision to do a slightly kind of like underside angle, like a slight up angle, makes it feel like there's a lot of power in that snake and a lot of kind of dominance in that snake. At least to a viewer like me, what was kind of, I guess the thought process on an image like that, and how do you kind of wait, or how do you kind of capture that maybe, or decide on that perfect moment, you know, where the snake's curled up in that position? Or
so king snakes have a lot of different personalities, and this one was little bit unhappy to have some people around checking him out and taking photos. And this was actually my first time seeing such a strong kind of coiling up behavior. Usually they just kind of bend their neck a little bit, but this guy went all the way up and was ready to go. And just standing there, the snake was pretty low to the ground, so standing there looking down, I couldn't really tell what was going on very much, so I decided to kind of crouch on the ground next to it, and just having that depth of field and kind of the bokeh in the background and stuff like that instantly just made the whole pose pop a lot more. And this one I did struggle with the composition because the head and like neck and the beginning of the body are in one spot, but then there's still so much of the snake kind of in the background. So I definitely played around with a lot of different cropping options and stuff.
Yeah.
But what ended up working the best was showing the whole snake.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I can imagine those are difficult decisions because, you know, with birds, unless you're incredibly close up, for example, it's often that you're capturing a whole body regardless. But with a snake being such a long subject, a lot of times you have to make those decisions. Where do I cut it off? Like, what body point do I cut it off at?
Yeah,
so, yeah,
exactly.
Another image of yours that I really loved, that might be one of my favorites that I've ever seen of yours, was that image of a salamander that you got with just this amazing scene around it. And what I loved so much about that image was that not only do you get to see the salamander prominently, but you kind of get to see it really immersed in its environment in the way that it was kind of like dug into the wetness of that marsh or the riverbed or whatever it may have been around it. Can you tell me a little bit more about that image and kind of your choice to compose that environment and how you kind of captured that all?
Yes. So this is a pretty common salamander from around where I live called an Ensatina. And this was the most vibrantly yellow one I've ever seen. There's a lot of variation between individuals. And when they're young, like this one was probably maybe an inch big, very small. And this one was just this electric yellow. And I had the probe lens on me at the time, and we're in the middle of a redwood forest. So I was like, okay, I have to figure out some way to kind of show the greenery and the orange, the duff, and then the mud. I usually don't incorporate a lot of mud in my salamander photos. I'll kind of wait for them to crawl somewhere maybe more photogenic, but I agree with what you said. I think it ended up adding a lot to this image. And again, it was just a matter of kind of laying on the ground, and then I kind of shot in a circle around it until I found that perfect angle. And going back to kind of comparing it to bird photography and stuff like that, macro is, you're kind of lucky in that sense where you're able to get up and like walk a full circle around the subject and see so many different angles and stuff like that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
You have a lot more patience, or I guess time with the subject. Yeah. Which is really nice. Did in that image, the probe lens, because I know, like, do you typically use the light on the end of that probe lens to help give you kind of some more exposure up front? Because I would imagine, like in that image, I feel like you did a really good job of getting that whole dynamic range out of that image. But I know that in a forest, it can be a lot darker down there. So does that probe lens help you a lot in that type of way?
I have actually never used the light at the end. I should. I think my main reason was that I just lost the you have to have it plugged into an external power source constantly, and I lost the cable for that, and none of mine fit it exactly.
Yeah.
So what I've been doing is using just these cheap LED lights I found on Amazon that are meant for like taking selfies on your phone and filming TikToks and stuff like that, and they work great.
Yeah.
It was a pretty funny find. And with the probe, because of the aperture limitations and stuff, you usually need a really long shutter speed, which means I usually have to prop my camera up on something or use a tripod. And then that frees up my hands to kind of go and hold lights around the subject and play around with the lighting. I definitely enjoy having more flexibility with that and less just one point, and it's always going to be lit from that angle.
That makes sense. Yeah. You're kind of whether you like it or not, you're forced to have your hands free because of that aperture limitation. Yeah. And so it kind of just gives you extra room to kind of pushes you towards being creative with that lighting. So that's cool.
Yeah.
There was one last image that I really liked of yours that I wanted to talk about as well. And it was the Nudibranch that was swimming maybe through a tide pool, I would assume, at that moment. But what I really liked about that image was the way that you kind of composed this gap in the water. So you have like this more simple backdrop against the Nudibranch, but then you have this whole environment around it. And I think you were saying in the description that it was using the surface tension to kind of like push itself along. So you can kind of see that activity going on as well. In an image like that, how do you kind of compose an image like that in nature where I guess the balance between keeping things simple and prominent enough with those environmental shots to where you notice the subject, but still including enough to give a whole idea and picture of the environment?
Yes. So nudibranchs are a type of kind of like marine slug. They're like a marine snail without a shell. And one of the coolest behaviors you can see is them, like you said, using the surface tension to kind of walk along the top of the surface. They can't swim, but they can climb up and then hitch a ride on the currents by kind of attaching themselves upside down on the surface of the water, which in turn makes them pretty easy to spot when they do that. It's pretty easy to see an object floating around in the tide pools. this image was pretty frustrating to get. I saw this individual showcasing that behavior and knew I absolutely wanted to try and show that perspective from underwater, but the tide was starting to come in, so the nudibranch was back and forth and back and forth and all around.
Yeah.
And it was a very large pool, and I did notice there's kind of a couple spots where it looks like there's a little canyon almost in the background, and I just kind of observed the back and forth, the patterns of the current, and I stationed myself in front of that little ravine and then just waited and then just held the shutter down and hoped I got something that had lined up with that background.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I will say, shooting that perspective with the probe, it's pushing it a little bit. My camera was like right on the surface of the water, and I was a bit worried, but so far so good. I've had no issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
But definitely a bit nerve-wracking sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I love exactly how big you frame the subject in comparison to the environment in that shot too, because I feel like it makes that subject look so small, as it rightfully is, but yet it's not too small to where it just gets lost. It's still there, and it's still definitely the focus. So yeah, it's an excellent image that you were able to capture.
You.
I'm kind of curious, as a college student, what's because you're in these conversations and discussions all the time, I'm sure, in college, in university, talking about all these things, conservation and what's best for the natural world. As humans, I guess it's an understatement to say that we have a big impact on the world, and of course we should be trying to do our best to avoid creating problems in the first place. But sometimes I guess I think through my brain beyond, obviously trying to avoid those things in the first place, how much we should get our hands really into conservation. Like, for example, I recently got to spot a super rare bird down in Laguna Beach. And it was only there, sadly, because it was sick. But while I did kind of post it up, hope that a rescue team got out there, and one got out there, and they were able to, hopefully at least nurse it back to help. In situations like that, sometimes I do think in my brain, like, is the natural world just supposed to take its course? Like, should I allow these situations to just happen and just witness it? Or is this something that, like, I should call, upon humans to help hopefully intervene in and help fix these problems and all that stuff? I guess, what's your take on how much humans should be involved hands-on with the environment? Or should we take a little bit more of a hands-off approach? Or what's your thoughts on that?
I'm definitely for, I'd say, a more hands-on approach. And I've definitely brought a couple seabirds into wildlife care centers and stuff like that. But unfortunately, there are things that happen. There's a lot of sicknesses and deficiencies and stuff, and kind of seasonalities to certain, specifically with the seabirds. There's months where the whole beach is just kind of covered, and it's really sad to see. And I think with things like that, there is only so much us as humans can do, but I do still think there's a lot of other situations where being hands-on can have a tremendous impact. Up at near my school, there's a lot of coastal dunes and a lot of issues with European beach grass and ice plant and invasive species of plants. And there's a couple properties along the coast that have made it their goal to completely eradicate all of the invasive species that they can. And there's volunteer groups that go out and completely, kind of re-landscape the dunes. And it's within those areas where the invasive plants and stuff have been removed where I see the most biodiversity and where I find the sandworm thing that I just posted that keeps coming up. And then you walk a couple miles down the beach and then it's all invasives and there's just not as much life present there. And through things like that, I think definitely being hands-on is really important. Another one that's kind of a big topic in California is wildfires and prescribed burns and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And in school and stuff, it's been interesting to learn about different indigenous approaches to it and stuff, and how there have been prescribed burns happening in the state for a very, very long time, and learning about the benefits and stuff.
Yeah.
For that. So, yeah.
Yeah, being a California person myself as well, that's a huge topic out here.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's such like I don't know, it's such a weird thing to think about, because it's, you can see the incline in wildfires ever since we started managing the forests much more intensely, back, in the 1930s and so on and so forth. 1930s, somewhere around there, I forget exactly. But you can see it's just been basically, like, after a very short dip, it's just been a constant incline in the amount of wildfires that we get over here. So it's like the fact that we do intervene and not allow for wildfires causes more wildfires in the long run, but also in the short run, we're like, helping save some of the biodiversity in the short run by preventing those wildfires. So it's such like a weird problem, I feel like, to understand, and it makes it really difficult to kind of navigate and figure out kind of exactly how involved we should be in all of that. What's the biggest threat to the animals that you care deeply about?
I'd say the thing I encounter the most is habitat destruction, whether that's through invasive species of plants and stuff like what we were talking about earlier, and also just land development and stuff like that. Going back to my time growing up in Colorado, I spent a lot of time with owls and would watch the same pairs return to the same spot to nest year and year again and stuff. And then a new neighborhood went up and stuff like that. And I revisited a creek just the other month that had a lot of screech owls and stuff like that. And I was trying to show my boyfriend where all of them were and stuff. And we walk around a bend and suddenly there's no more trees. The past 3 seasons of nesting trees were gone and stuff like that. I think to get ready for some more development, because this is in the heart of the suburbs and stuff like that. And it's just kind of that was tough for me to see.
Yeah.
And it's interesting what dictates whether or not land, should be cleared and developed like that, or what should be preserved and stuff like that.
Yeah, those are all difficult things, and a lot of decisions that we as humans, as we continue to, I guess, work towards progress in different ways in this world, have to take into consideration and decide, where's the lines and what's the limits, and all of that tricky stuff. So appreciate you sharing that. So being someone that is of the younger generation yourself, and you have lots of people in this craft of wildlife photography who the very high majority, probably 97% or 95% or more probably, are older than you. What's something that you feel like you are able to maybe see in our wildlife photography community culture as a young person that you think might be important to recognize and that might be missed out on by people of an older generation? That's
a good question. There's a lot of things I could go into. I do want to say that the community that younger photographers have made and built up on social media and through group chats and stuff like that has been really helpful for my journey. I've met some fantastic people that I've went out to go shooting with and stuff. And I think just our kind of use of social media and stuff maybe more frequently than older generations has led to a lot of good conversations and community like that.
So for you, as I asked everyone that comes on this podcast, what is the single most important thing to remember when it comes to wildlife photography?
Don't be afraid of taking too many photos. Like, just don't, I don't know. I've worked with some people who they kind of take one and they're like, okay, I'm done. I got the image. And sometimes they don't even get the image in that one photo. And if you just spend a couple more minutes and try out different angles, different settings and stuff like that, you might fill your card up, but at least one or two of those images will probably work and be really strong. And that's been something I've definitely kind of learned to embrace a bit more, is just trying to constantly try things out and stuff like that. And if you're a beginner and just starting up photography, also don't let your gear limit you. Like, there are definitely certain aspects of more beginner gear where, yeah, you can't take super high quality, really low light photos and stuff like that. But I'd say one of my most important learning, I guess, opportunities with photography was because I was using lower end gear, and I had to learn to work with that and to push it as much as I could. And that taught me way more about photography than if I had started with higher end, perfect autofocus gear and stuff like that. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. I just filmed about a week ago. I challenged myself to, I bought literally the cheapest camera available on Amazon for $35. It's just
that's really, wow.
It's just a point and shoot, like just the most basic, like horrible camera you could possibly get. Like, it's worse than my phone, honestly. Like, could have just used my phone if I would have realized how bad it was. But I did that and just wanted to make a little video on it just because I wanted to challenge myself to see what can I really get with the worst possible gear out there. Like is all this new gear as necessary, like, as, it's made out to be? And that video will be releasing soon. But in short, I mean, I kind of discovered through that gear does matter a lot, but
yeah,
if you work really hard at it, you can still make some pretty good art. And I would argue that, like, I got maybe like 1 or 2 shots during my time with it that were better shots than the same shots I got like 4 or 5 years ago when I first visited that same location that I went to and like tried my best at that time, because my skill set was just so much more limited. So yeah, I think that it's a testament to, like, you don't need the best gear. Of course it's going to help. It really will. I mean, I really wished I had different gear in a lot of those shots that I took that other day. But you can make do with really anything if you're creative enough. And so I love that you shared that. And it's definitely a good thing to remember.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Sadie. It was an honor getting to have you, and looking forward to seeing what you continue to create.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's been great.
Thank you all for watching. If you'd like to see more from Sadie Hine, make sure to head over to her Instagram in the description below. This year's live wildlife photography competition I host annually is coming up in just a week from now. And in the spirit of macro today, we'll be opening up a brand new category for you guys to submit to with our new macro category. If you subscribe to the Wilder leaflet in the description, you'll be first to notified when the competition goes live so that you can submit your images, and you'll receive a special offer exclusive for Wilder leaflet subscribers. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.